Hey everyone, welcome back to Ghost Reveals. So today's video is a little different and honestly pretty unsettling. We're getting into small town horror stories. Stories that prove even the quietest, most normal looking towns can hide some really dark things. If you guys enjoy this type of content, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you want more stories like this. All right, let's chalk off some small towns.
Sheriff Cole believed in tracks the way some men believe in scripture, steady and unquestioning, because he said the ground never lied if you learned how to listen to it. He could read a footprint the way other men read faces, could tell weight and mood and purpose just by how deep a heel pressed or how a toe angled. When the gunshot cracked the night air just after midnight, sharp and lonely, he didn't wait for dawn. He pulled on his coat, buckled his belt, and saddled his horse like the sound had personally offended him. I rode with him because I was young and thought courage meant following men who didn't hesitate. The town was quiet as a held breath when we reached the edge, lantern light sliding over empty buildings and shuttered windows. We found a boot print just past the last house, fresh and dark in damp soil. One set only. No horse tracks, no sign of running. Cole knelt and studied them like an old friend. Size 10, he murmured. Heavy heel. Man ain't scared. The prints led straight out into the open field beyond the cottonwoods, where the grass rolled silver onto the moon. The wind moved slow there, pushing waves through the field like water that forgot how to make noise. We followed in silence, lantern low, horses uneasy. The track stayed steady and even, spaced like a man walking with time to spare. Halfway across the field, the air began to feel wrong. Not colder, not warmer, just closer. Like the night had leaned in to watch. Then the print stopped. Not faded, not scattered. Stopped. One final boot print pressed deep into the mud, tread sharp as if stamped. Beside it was another impression, round and wide, too smooth to be natural. Cole frowned and knelt. Where'd he go? I asked. Cole didn't answer. He pressed his fingers into the print. Then he jerked his hand back. The ground's warm, he whispered. I knelt and touched it myself. He was right. The earth felt warm, like it had been sitting in the sun, though moonlight was all it had seen. We searched outward in widening circles. No other tracks. No sign of struggle. No broken grass. Just a field quiet and watching. Cole stood very still, lantern trembling in his hand. He went down, he said. Down where? I asked. Cole didn't smile. Down, he repeated. He drew his knife and drove it into the soil at the edge of the print. The blade slid in too easy. When he pried, the earth shifted, not collapsed, shifted, like something turning over in its sleep. A smell rose from the hole, damp and sour and old, like a cellar that hadn't been opened in years. Then the ground sighed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It sounded like breath leaving a body. The lantern flickered. The grass around us stopped moving. From below, soft and careful, came a whisper. Cole. Sheriff Cole froze. His eyes went wide, but not surprised. Recognizing. How does it know me? He whispered. The hole widened a fraction. Cole's boot slid an inch toward it. He tried to pull back. The mud thickened around his sole, gripping like fingers. I grabbed his arm. The ground pulled harder. Cole shouted once, a sharp sound, and the soil answered by sucking inward. His other boots sank. The earth climbed his ankles like it was being polite about it. I hauled with everything I had. My shoulders screamed. The mud resisted, stretching like wet hide. Cole's badge scraped against the dirt. The whisper came again, warmer now. Cole. I pulled until something tore. Cole came free with a ripping sound like cloth splitting. We fell backward hard, gasping. The hole sealed itself behind us. The field went quiet again. The wind returned. The grass moved. It looked normal. Too normal. We ran to the cottonwoods without looking back. At dawn, we returned with half the town. The field showed nothing. No prints. No marks. No hole. Just grass and soil, smooth as if no one had ever walked there. The man who fired the shot was never found. No body. No blood. No answers. Sheriff Cole resigned the next day. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He He folded his badge like it was made of paper and set it on the desk. Years later, I found him in another state, older and thinner, hands shaking around a coffee cup. I asked him why he quit. He stared into the dark liquid for a long time. Then he said the ground knew his name. He said once something knows you like that, it never forgets. People still disappear in that field. Sometimes boots are found nearby, sometimes nothing at all. But when the soil is damp and the moon is high, folks say the earth feels warm underfoot, like it's waiting. Folks on the range will argue about anything: brands, weather, women, the best way to doctor a hoof. But there's one thing most riders don't argue about. You don't take gear that ain't yours, and you don't take gear you don't understand. We were camped on a shallow bend of the Cimarron, water moving quiet under moonlight like it was ashamed of the sound it made. The kind of night where the sky looks too big and the stars look too close, and you start thinking about things you don't usually let in. My partner Wade was the sort of man who believed in luck the way a gambler believes in cards. Hard, hungry, always looking for an edge. He'd been a thief when he was young. He said so like it was a badge he'd retired. Quick hands, quick grin, quicker temper when the world told him no. That night, he found the saddle. It wasn't leaning on a fence post, wasn't hanging from a rail. It sat upright in the grass like somebody had set it there careful, stirrups even, cinched strap tucked neat, leather dark as old coffee. No blanket under it, no horse nearby, just that saddle, watching the fire with a shine that didn't match the age in its scuffs. Wade let out a low whistle. "That's good hide," he said. I didn't touch it, didn't even like looking at it straight. The thing had a smell, faint, sweet sour, like iron left too long in warm water. Could be a trap, I told him. Wade laughed, the way men laugh when they'd rather not feel small. "Only trap out here is hunger," he said, and ran his thumb along the horn. The leather squeaked, not from dryness, but like it was tightening. He held it up to the firelight, admiring the tooling. At first it looked like normal, where little half moons pressed along the skirts. But when the flames shifted and shadows deepened, the mark started looking less like age and more like something intentional. Like fingernails dug in hard in a line. Like a man had held on to that saddle while something tried to take him off it. Wade didn't see that part. Or he did, and he didn't want to. He set it near his bedroll, as if he'd claimed it. The horses didn't like it. They didn't bolt, didn't scream. They just angled their bodies away from where the saddle sat and held their ears pinned. One of them snorted, and there was real fear in it, the kind horses get before lightning. Wade noticed and smirked. "They don't like new leather," he said. "That ain't new," I muttered. He slept with his gun under his hand. I lay awake longer than I meant to, listening to the river and the wind and the little noises a camp makes when it's trying to pretend it's safe. Near midnight, something woke me. Not a sound at first, more like a change, like the air had leaned in. The fire was mostly coals, giving off that low, watchful red. The world beyond was dark and still, the river a pale ribbon. Then I heard it, a dragging sound through grass, soft and steady, patient as a man who knows he's got time. I sat up. The saddle wasn't where Wade left it. It was moving, not fast, not jerky, just sliding over the ground, horn first, like it knew where it was going. The cinched strap trailed behind, making a faint snake line through the grass. My mouth dried up. I couldn't make myself shout. Fear does that sometimes. It takes your voice and leaves you with nothing but watching. Wade stirred and lifted his head. "What?" The saddle stopped beside him. For a long breath, nothing happened. Even the river sounded far away. Then the stirrup leather rose slowly, like a hand lifting a curtain. The saddle tipped toward Wade as if it was considering him. Wade's eyes went wide. He scooted back on his elbows. "Cut out," he whispered, like he thought it was a joke he could negotiate with. The cinched strap slid forward, curling like a tongue. Wade grabbed his gun and fired once. The flash lit the camp in hard white, and for that blink, I saw the underside of the saddle. It was wet, darker than leather should be. Not water dark, blood dark, fresh enough to shine. Threaded into the rigging was something that looked like rope at first glance, except it moved wrong. It had the thickness of braided hair and the slow flex of muscle. The gunshot didn't scare it. The saddle didn't even flinch. Wade scrambled to his feet. The saddle lunged. I swear on everything I ever buried, it lunged. The cinch strap snapped around Wade's ankle and yanked. He hit the ground so hard the sound made my teeth hurt. He clawed at the strap, trying to pull it off. His fingers slipped like the thing was greased, like it was coated in something warm and living. It dragged him away from the coals and into the grass, toward the river's darker bend where reeds grew thick. Wade kicked and cursed, trying to hook his heel into the dirt. The earth didn't help him. The earth just let him slide. I ran after him, stupid brave the way men get when terror finally boils into action. I grabbed his wrist. His skin was cold and slick with sweat. "Hold on," I shouted, and it came out cracked like my throat was breaking. The saddle pulled again. Wade's body slid like he weighed nothing. Dirt tore under him. Grass ripped free. His nails clawed the earth, leaving crescent marks, half moons, just like the ones tooled into the saddle skirts. He didn't scream much, just one long sound, like a breath turning into a question. We hit the reeds. The river's stink rose, mud and rot, and something metallic. Wade's boots disappeared into the dark water line. I braced my feet and hauled. The strap tightened like it was laughing. Something in the river tugged back. Not a current, not a log, a pull with intention. Wade's grip on my hand slipped, millimeter by millimeter. His eyes locked on mine, wide and pleading. He tried to say something, but his teeth chattered too hard. Then the water behind him bulged upward, like a back rising under a blanket. Wade's face changed. Fear went sudden to blankness, the way a man looks when he understands he's outmatched. His fingers slid free of mine. He vanished into the reeds without a splash big enough to call it a drowning. Like the river had opened a mouth and closed it neat. The cinch strap went slack. The saddle settled onto the bank, calm as a church pew. The leather gleamed in the starlight. I stood shaking, listening for thrashing, listening for a shout, listening for any sign that Wade was still on the right side of the world. Nothing. Only the river, moving quiet, like it had swallowed something it didn't want to name. At dawn, I searched the bend until my legs felt hollow. I found Wade's boots a few yards downstream, still laced, still upright, toes pointed toward the water like they were waiting for the rest of him to arrive. And beside them, set into the mud like somebody arranged it with care, was the saddle, warm to the touch. No horse, no tracks, no drag marks leading away. Just that sweet sour smell, stronger now, and the half-moon nail marks dug deep into the leather as if a man had held on so hard he'd left his panic behind in the hide. I left it there. I rode away without looking back. But I'll tell you this quiet as it needs telling. Sometimes when I camp near water and the fire burns down low, I hear that dragging sound through grass, patient, steady, coming from the direction of the river. And when I sit up with my hand on my gun, I can smell iron and warm water. Like the saddle's still out there, looking for another rider. Black Hollow ain't a place folks ride through on purpose. Not if they've lived long enough to know the difference between empty land and land that's watching you back. Because the hollow sits low and wrong in the earth like a scar that never healed. A place where wind forgets how to move and sound goes thin and sinks instead of traveling. And even at noon the shadows cling too long, as if they don't trust the sun to stay. I rode its rim once with my Uncle Amos back when I still believed fear was something you could outrun if your horse was good enough. And we were pushing 2 sail horses east late in the season when the light turns pale and the air smells like endings. And when we reached the edge, Amos hauled his reins so hard his horse snorted and stamped, refusing to go closer. And he sat there staring down into the fog pool at the bottom like breath from a sleeping thing. And when I asked why we weren't crossing, he said some places remember, and Black Hollow remembers everyone. And I laughed because young men laugh at warnings they don't yet understand. We camped back from the edge with a fire no bigger than it needed to be, and the horses never settled right, shifting and snorting as if the ground beneath them whispered things meant only for hooves. And night came wrong, not gradual but sudden and heavy. No insects singing, no owls calling, no coyotes yipping, just the pop of wood and the sound of our breathing. And that's when the light appeared, far below, a single, lantern bobbing slow and steady through the fog like a promise somebody didn't deserve. And I leaned forward thinking it was another rider until I noticed the horse beneath him wasn't making any sound at all, its hooves never striking rock or dirt, just gliding. And Amos grabbed my shoulder hard enough to bruise and told me not to call out. And as the rider came closer, the fog thinned, and I saw there was no face under his hat, just shadow where a man should be, like darkness had learned how to, where clothes and the lantern swung gently, and the light inside, it looked thicker than light ought to be, like it had weight. And when the rider lifted it slightly, I felt a pull behind my eyes, a tug on memory itself. And in the glass I saw myself older and hollow, hands burned raw and blistered, riding the hollow night after night, searching for something I couldn't name. And Amos knocked my gaze away and hissed that's how he chooses you, that if you look too long, you carry the lantern next. And the rider paused as if disappointed. The fog thickened again, and then he turned and drifted deeper into the hollow until the light thinned and vanished like it had been swallowed. And Amos told me that rider lost something down there. Maybe his life, maybe his death, and now he rides looking for someone else to take it. And we left before sunrise without saying another word. Weeks later, word came from a ranch north of there that a boy had gone missing while looking for a stray calf near the hollow, and they found him 2 days later, sitting upright against a stone, frozen solid though the nights hadn't been that cold, his hands blackened and blistered like he'd held hot glass too long, eyes open and empty, and no lantern anywhere near him. And after that, folks started talking quieter about Black Hollow, saying the rider was once a lawman who chased a murderer into the fog and never came back, or a husband who went searching for his wife who'd thrown herself into the ravine, or a gambler who rode after a debt he couldn't afford to lose. And every version agreed on one thing, that he won't stop riding until someone follows him all the way down. And years passed, and I grew older and learned not to laugh so quick. And one autumn, I found myself riding near that country again after dark, taking a shortcut I swore I wouldn't take, and the night was still in that same wrong way, and the horses began to shift and snort. And before I even saw it, I knew it was there, the lantern light blooming softly in the fog below, patient as breath. And it moved closer than it ever had before, close enough that I could hear leather creak and smell cold oil. And the lantern lifted just a little as if offering rest, offering answers, offering the end of riding. And for a terrible moment, I wanted it more than I've ever wanted anything. Wanted to stop being afraid of the dark and the past and the way life keeps taking without asking. And then I remembered Amos' hand on my shoulder and the boy frozen against the stone and the blistered hands, and I turned my horse away without looking again and rode hard until my lungs burned. And even now, years later, I sometimes see a light moving slow through low places where fog settles thick. And I don't stop because Black Hollow remembers everyone. And if it remembers you long enough, it calls you home. A herd has its own voice, and any man who's ridden long enough learns to hear it the way you learn a friend's footsteps in the dark. There's the low, easy sound of grazing, the restless shuffle before weather turns, the deep warning murmur when something ain't right. So when Harlan Pike said his cattle screamed, most folks laughed until they heard it themselves. We were 3 days into the drive, pushing the herd slow across open country, when the sound came from the back like a knife drawn across bone. It wasn't a moo, and it wasn't panic exactly. It was a scream, thin and high and human, like someone begging through clenched teeth. Horses threw their heads and sidestepped, whites of their eyes flashing. Men went still in their saddles, hands tightening on reins. Harlan's face drained of color beneath his beard, and he whispered that it was happening again. The sound rose once more, layered now, fear braided with something worse, something almost relieved. The cattle began to bunch tight, pressing against each other like they were trying to crawl into one body. Their eyes rolled white, and foam flecked their mouths. Then one steer folded and dropped straight down like its legs had been cut. Another followed. No thrashing, no blood, no sound at all. A ranch hand named Fitch jumped off his horse and ran to the nearest one. He lifted the steer's lip to check its gums. Fitch screamed louder than the cattle ever had. I slid down beside him and felt my stomach turn cold. Embedded in the steer's gums were human teeth. Not one or two, but many. Some were yellowed and worn, others small and white like they'd come from a child. They were packed in there like gravel pressed into mud. Harlan crossed himself and whispered that it was Crow's Throat again. Crow's Throat was a narrow canyon ahead of us, a deep cut in the land locals avoided when they could. Harlan said the canyon took cattle sometimes. He said always had. We argued then, voices sharp and scared, but fear don't stop a drive and buyers don't accept excuses. We pushed on. The canyon walls rose steep and close, shadows clinging even under the sun. The air inside felt cool and damp, like a cellar that never aired out. The cattle moved toward it without urging. They didn't resist or balk or panic. They walked as if they were being called home. As the first cows entered the canyon, the screaming returned. It was louder now and closer, echoing off stone. Beneath it ran another sound, low and wet, like breath moving through a throat too small for it. One by one, the cattle vanished into the shadows. Hoofbeats faded. Bells stopped ringing. We rode to the canyon mouth with guns drawn and mouths dry. Inside, the ground was soft, far too soft for packed earth. Hoofprints sank deep, too deep, all of them running forward like the cattle had been running. Then the prints ended. No bodies lay beyond. No blood stained the ground. Just piles of teeth scattered across the dirt, white against the dark soil. Hundreds of them, different shapes, different ages. The smell inside the canyon was thick and coppery. From deeper within came a sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a moo anymore. It sounded like something trying to learn how to scream. We backed out without turning our backs. No one spoke. That night we camped far from the canyon, fire burning low. No one ate. No one slept. Sometime after midnight, the screaming came again. It echoed across the prairie, rolling and twisting until it almost sounded like laughter. Harlan sat staring into the dark, rocking slightly, and said the canyon learned voices. He said it learned them from anything that died inside. He said once it learned enough, it started calling. At dawn, we counted what cattle remained. Nearly half the herd was gone. The buyers accused us of lying. They accused us of stealing. They didn't believe in screaming cattle. They didn't believe until they found teeth in the mouths of the ones that survived. Word spread after that. Other ranchers lost herds near Crow's Throat. Some lost horses. One lost a man. They found his boots at the canyon mouth. Toes pointed inward, laces still tied. No body was ever found. Years later, I rode past that country again. I stayed well clear of the canyon. But at night, with the wind just right, I heard it, lowing from deep underground. Too many voices layered together. Not cattle anymore. Men, women, children, calling. And beneath it all, a sound like something breathing, satisfied. The fire had burned down to coals, the kind that didn't throw light so much as they watched you back. Out on the flats, the wind moved through the sage in low shivers. Every so often, a coyote yipped like it had something to prove. We were 3 riders deep into the Red Mesa country, pushing a small remuda to a buyer 2 days ride north. It was late season, cold enough that your breath came out like smoke from a chimney, and the stars looked sharp enough to cut. Jeb Mallory sat with his boots toward the heat, rolling a cigarette like his fingers were made of rope. He was the eldest among us, the kind of cowboy who didn't waste words. When Jeb spoke, you listened, not because he demanded it, but because silence gathered around him like it belonged there. "Don't ride past the cottonwood after sundown," he said, like he'd just remembered a chore he didn't want to do. I looked up from my tin cup. "What cottonwood?" Jeb's eyes stayed on the coals. "You'll know it when you see it." Cal, the youngest, snorted and tossed a pebble into the fire. It clicked like a tooth. "A tree's a tree," he said. "Ain't no tree tells me where I can ride." Jeb didn't argue. He just pulled on his cigarette, ember brightening the lines around his mouth, and let the quiet do the talking. That should have been the end of it. But the wind shifted, and the horses picketed behind us started shifting too. Hoof scraping, tack creaking. Not panicked, just uneasy, like they caught a scent they didn't want. Cal saw it too, and his grin faltered. "They smell a cat," he said, though it didn't sound like he believed it. Jeb finally looked up. "Ain't a cat." He leaned forward and fed another stick to the coals. The wood popped, and in that quick flare of light, I caught something in his face. Not fear, something older, like memory with teeth. "You boys ever notice," Jeb said, "how some places don't get quiet at night, and some places get too quiet?" Cal rolled his eyes, but he didn't interrupt. Jeb started talking the way men do when the story isn't for entertainment, when it's for warning. "Back when I was trailing for the Garrison outfit," he began, "we had a hand named Silas Crow. Mean man. Not loud mean, worse. The kind that'd smile when he hurt somebody. He'd ride into town, pick a fight, and come back pleased with himself, like he'd bought something fine." The fire ticked. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird made a soft, lonely call. "One evening we was bringing cattle through Red Mesa," Jeb continued, "and Silas got in his head that old Mrs. Acker, widow woman with 2 girls, was hiding money under her floorboards. He'd heard it from somebody drinking, and that was enough for him." Cal opened his mouth like he was about to joke, but the way Jeb's voice fell shut him down. "Silas rode off alone," Jeb said. "Didn't ask, didn't tell, just went. Next morning, he come back to the herd with a sack over his saddle horn. Heavy sack. He wouldn't say what was inside, only that he'd settled a debt." Jeb stared into the coals again. "We found Mrs. Acker's place that afternoon. Door busted. 2 shallow mounds out back where the ground was still dark with turned soil. No crosses, no markers, just hurried dirt. The wind moved across the prairie and made the sage hiss like something being told to hush." I swallowed. "What did the outfit do?" Jeb's mouth twitched, almost a smile, except it didn't reach his eyes. "Outfits don't do much when the man holding the gun is on their side. They grumbled. They spat. They said it was bad luck. But they kept moving cattle." Cal stared at the fire now, the pebble forgotten in his hand. A week later, Jeb said Silas started complaining about his rope. I frowned. "His rope?" "Yep." Said it was tangling itself. Said he'd coil it neat, set it down, and come back to find it knotted like a snake pile. He blamed the Remuda boys, blamed the wind, blamed everybody. Jeb held his hands out as if measuring something invisible. Then he started seeing it, just out the corner of his eye. A loop swing in from a branch that weren't there a second before. A shadow line hanging where the moonlight didn't hang. Cal cleared his throat. "Sounds like guilty nerves." Jeb nodded once, slow. "That's what I said too. We all did. Even Silas at first." He laughed it off. "Then one night, we camped near a dry wash, and the coyotes went dead quiet. Not even a rustle. Horses stood with their ears pinned like they was listening to something far away." He paused, letting the quiet settle in around us like dust. "Silas got up," Jeb said, "walked off into the dark like he was called. We found him at sunup." My throat tightened. "Where?" Jeb's eyes lifted toward the black sky. The stars looked colder then, somehow. "Under the cottonwood," he said. I felt a prickling on my arms, though I wasn't sure if it was the cold. "There's a cottonwood out here?" Jeb's gaze moved past me, over my shoulder, like he didn't have to see it to know it was there. "Not far." Cal shifted, trying to laugh. "So he hung himself. Big tough Silas Crow? Don't buy it." Jeb didn't flinch. He didn't hang himself. The coals sighed as a log settled. For a moment, the firelight drew the shape of the world. Our bedrolls, our saddles, Cal's 2 young face. And beyond that, darkness that felt deep as water. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me didn't want the answer. Jeb spoke quietly. "Rope was tied perfect to the branch. Nicer than Silas ever tied anything. His boots were still on the ground, toes dug in, like he'd been trying to stand up and couldn't. Like the air itself was pulling him. And here's the thing, there weren't no ladder. No stump, no rock, not even a low limb to climb. Just Silas, raised up where he couldn't have gotten on his own." Cal's voice came thin. "Maybe somebody did it." Jeb nodded. "Maybe." He flicked ash into the fire, and it rose like a tiny swarm of sparks. Only there were no tracks. Not one. Ground was soft with dew. We checked all around. Nothing. Just Silas's boot prints lead in and nothing lead in out. The wind pushed harder, and the horses behind us snorted and stomped like they wanted to leave. One of them let out a low, trembling whicker that didn't sound like a horse at all. Cal glanced back, then forced his eyes forward again. Jeb leaned closer, voice dropping even more. "We cut Silas down. I was the one who did it. Rope felt warm, like it had just been handled. And when Silas hit the ground, Jeb paused, swallowing once. His face was bruised black, like fingers had been pressed into his throat. Not rope burn. Fingers. I sat very still. What happened after? Jeb stared at the darkness beyond the firelight. After, we buried him. We rode on. Folks said it was justice. Said it was God. Said it was the devil. Everybody picked their comfort. He shifted his jaw, as if remembering a taste he couldn't spit out. But the cottonwood stayed. Cal tried to stand then, maybe to shake off the story, maybe to prove he wasn't scared. His boots scuffed the dirt, and that's when we heard it. Not loud, not sharp, a creak, like leather under strain. All three of us froze. The sound came again, slow, patient. Creak. Jeb's eyes narrowed. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't have to. A gun didn't mean much against a sound like that. Cal whispered, That's a branch. Jeb spoke without looking at him. Ain't no branches near camp. The horses gave another restless shuffle. The wind died suddenly, like the world was holding its breath. Even the sage stopped hissing. Then from out in the dark, just beyond where the firelight ended, a rope slid across something dry. Sophisticated. Cal's hand went to his revolver, finally. Who's there? He called, trying to make it sound like anger instead of fear. No answer. Just that slow, steady creaking. Like something swayed. Like something hung. Jeb stood very carefully and put one hand on Cal's shoulder. Not to comfort him, but to keep him from doing something stupid. Don't, Jeb murmured. Don't call it closer. I stared into the black and felt my heartbeat thudding like hooves in a box canyon. And then I saw it just barely. A pale line, not a branch, not a fence rope. A loop, hanging at head height, swaying gently as if touched by an invisible hand. It wasn't attached to anything I could see. It was just there, waiting. Cal made a small sound, like he'd swallowed his own breath. The loop drifted, almost curious, inching toward the firelight. And from somewhere above it, where there should have been only empty night, came a whisper, soft as ash. You'll know it when you see it. Jeb backed up one step, then another, dragging Cal with him. Put the fire out, he said, voice flat. Now. I didn't argue. I threw sand over the coals with shaking hands. The light died fast, and with it went the loop, like it had never existed at all. But the horses kept pulling, straining at their lines, desperate to go. And in the blackness, just before we mounted and fled, I heard one last sound. Right beside my ear, warm as breath. Creak, like a rope tightening. We found the town by accident, like you find a thorn in your glove, only after it's already in you. I was riding with my cousin Lyle, cutting across country to save a day's travel. The land out there was open and honest, wide grass, low hills, a sky that didn't hide much. That's why the lights stopped us. A town tucked into a shallow valley, glowing like a pocket full of coins spilled in the dark. No smoke from chimneys, no barking dogs, no sound at first. Then music floated up, fiddle and hand claps, boots stomping, laughter bright enough to make you forget how empty the valley looked. Wasn't here last year, Lyle muttered. Maybe you weren't looking, I said, but my stomach had that sinking feeling you get when your horse steps onto a bridge and the boards creak wrong. We rode down slow. The main street was lined with lanterns and crowded with people shoulder to shoulder, faces warm with excitement. Men in clean hats, women in bright dresses, kids sticky with sweets. It looked like a memory somebody polished and put on display. A banner hung between two posts. Last rodeo, one night only. Lyle grinned. Well, he said, ain't that a welcome? A man in a white shirt stepped toward us. His smile was too wide, eyes too still. Riders, he said, like he'd been waiting. You here to compete? No, I told him. Just passing through. His smile didn't move. Everybody competes, he said, cheerful as a hymn. That's the point. He held out 2 tickets, paper thin, edges damp like they'd been held in someone's mouth. Lyle took one without thinking. I didn't. The man's eyes slid to me. You don't want to be left out, he said softly, like a friend offering advice. I forced a polite smile. I'm fine, I said. The man's gaze lingered. Then he nodded once, as if filing me away, and turned back to Lyle. Arena's this way, he said. They're Callan riders soon. The crowd surged, and Lyle moved with it like a leaf caught in water. I followed because leaving Lyle alone in a strange town felt like letting a calf wander near a cliff. The arena sat behind the buildings, rails fresh painted, dirt raked smooth, lights strung overhead. It smelled like sweat, popcorn, and something faintly sour beneath it all. Pens held bulls. Their backs rose and fell slow. Too slow, like they were breathing the same breath. An announcer's voice boomed cheerful into a tin speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, welcome. One night only. Your last chance to be part of something special. The crowd cheered like they'd been starving for it. A rider stepped out, waving his hat. He looked thrilled. He looked terrified. The kind of man who'd bet his soul just to see if he could win it back. He mounted a bull, nodded, and the gate swung. The bull exploded into motion. The crowd roared. The announcer shouted numbers. Lyle cheered like a boy. The rider lasted 6 seconds before he hit the dirt. He rolled, tried to crawl away. The bull didn't gore him. Instead, the dirt beneath the rider shifted, subtle at first like heat haze. Then it softened. Then it opened. The rider's hands sank like the ground had turned to water. His elbows went next. He screamed once, muffled as his face dipped under. The earth swallowed him clean. The crowd cheered harder. I stood frozen, waiting for someone to react the way people react to death. Nobody did. They clapped. They laughed. They waved little flags. Lyle looked at me, eyes shining. "Did you see that?" He shouted over the noise, delighted like it was the finest trick he'd ever watched. "That wasn't a trick," I said. My voice came out thin. The man in the white shirt appeared beside us again, smiling. "Next rider," he called, and the crowd surged like a single animal. I grabbed Lyle's sleeve. "We're leaving," I hissed. Lyle blinked at me, confused. "That's the show," he said. "That's rodeo." "That ain't rodeo," I snapped. The man in white leaned closer, voice gentle. "Some folks don't appreciate tradition," he murmured. "But it's all right. They learn." I pulled Lyle through the crowd, shoving past shoulders. People didn't resist. They didn't even look offended. They just flowed around us, smiling. We reached the street. The music changed key, just a half step, but it turned sour like a happy song played on a wrong string. The buildings looked thinner now, the corners too sharp, like stage fronts painted to resemble real life. I passed a window and saw no room inside, just darkness. Deep in waiting. Our horses stood where we'd left them, but their eyes were rolling, whites showing. They strained against the reins like they wanted to tear their own heads off to get away. I swung up and reached down for Lyle. He hesitated, only a heartbeat, just long enough for the announcer's voice to boom again, suddenly close, suddenly personal. "Rider 2, Lyle Mercer." Lyle went still. I watched his face change the way a man's face changes when he hears his mother call from the porch. Recognition, comfort, obedience. He smiled at me, soft and distant. "Just one ride," he said. "One night only." I grabbed his arm. "Lyle, no." He looked at my hand like he didn't understand why I was holding him. Then he slipped out of my grip like I wasn't touching him at all. He stepped toward the arena, moving with the calm certainty of a man walking toward his own bed. I spurred my horse after him, but the street stretched longer than it should, like the town was unfolding itself. The arena felt miles away, though I could hear the cheering like it was right behind my teeth. Lyle disappeared into the crowd. Then, like a lantern blown out, the lights went dark. My horse screamed. Yes, screamed and bolted. I clung to the horn and let it run until my lungs burned. When dawn came, I was on open prairie. No valley, no town, no tracks but my own and my horse's. Only a strip of flattened grass where a banner might have been, and a single post in the dirt. Nailed to it was one damp paper ticket. Last rodeo, one night only. On the back, in tidy ink. Winner, Lyle Mercer. I never found him. But every summer, when rodeo posters go up in real towns, I see one sometimes, old and sun-faded, pinned to a fence post that wasn't there yesterday. And under the date, in smaller letters, like a whisper meant just for me. One night only. And if you listen close enough, late at night, you can hear the crowd cheering from somewhere that isn't on any map, cheering for riders who don't come back up. The land near Dry Bone Creek looks like nothing special, and that's what makes it dangerous. Flat grass, Pale dirt, a few stones bleached white by sun and wind, the kind of place your eyes slide over without stopping. Old hands avoided it, but not because it looked threatening. They avoided it because it felt wrong in a way that didn't announce itself. We only crossed it because our water was low and the longer trail would have cost us 2 days we didn't have. Rourke spat and said land was land, and fear didn't fill canteens, he was the boss, so we rode. The first 100 yards were easy. The grass bent under hooves the way grass should. The soil held firm. The wind moved steady and honest. Then my horse slowed. Not balking, not spooking, just losing interest in forward motion like the ground ahead had decided it wasn't worth trusting. I nudged him with my heel, but he didn't answer. Rourke rode past me and laughed, said horses were stupid that way. His horse stepped forward. The hoof sank an inch. Just an inch, but it didn't come back up right away. The horse snorted and shifted its weight. The ground clung. Rourke yanked the reins. The hoof came free with a soft sucking sound that made my stomach tighten. Keep moving, Rourke said that we did. Every step after that took effort. Not like mud. Not like sand. Like walking on something that wanted to hold you without seeming rude about it. Why boots pressed deeper than they should have. When I lifted my foot, the earth stretched slightly before letting go. I told myself it was damp soil. That I told myself lots of things. Then the screaming started. One of the hands at the rear panicked. He shouted that the ground was grabbing him. He tried to run. That was his mistake. The earth swallowed his boots to the ankle in one smooth motion. He screamed louder. The sound carried too well. The prairie shivered. I swear it did. The soil around him darkened. Not wet, just darker, like blood rising under skin that he felt to his knees. Then to his thighs that he clawed at the grass, ripping it free in fistfuls. The ground closed behind his hands like lips. Rourke shouted orders. Stay calm. Don't thrash. Don't fight it. But his voice shook, and the land heard that too. The screaming man tried to calm himself. He took ragged breaths. For a moment, he stopped sinking. The prairie went still. Then Rourke cursed. He whipped his horse. The horse screamed. The sound cracked sharp and terrified across the open land. The prairie answered. It rippled. That's the only word for it. The ground moved in a slow wave toward us like a thing stretching after sleep. The screaming man sank to his chest in a heartbeat. He sobbed, the sound breaking, and the soil seemed to soften under him, pleased. I understood then. The land wasn't hungry for flesh. It was hungry for fear. The louder you panicked, the faster it fed. I forced myself to breathe slow. I spoke calmly, like soothing a spooked animal. Easy, I said. It's all right. The man tried to follow my voice. His sinking slowed. His eyes locked on mine. Hope flickered. Rourke stepped forward. Hold still. He barked. His boots sank, just slightly. Rourke froze. The ground tightened. It climbed his boot like syrup. He yanked back. The prairie resisted. Rourke shouted, and the land took him. It swallowed him so fast it looked like he'd been pulled straight down through a trapdoor. No scream. Just gone. The soil smoothed itself where he'd stood. The screaming man lost hope when Rourke vanished. Hope makes men quiet. Hopelessness makes them loud. He screamed again. The prairie drank him by the time his voice cut off. Only his head remained above ground. His eyes rolled white. The soil reached his mouth. His scream turned into a gurgle. Then silence. The prairie settled. The wind returned. Grass waved gently. It looked normal again, like nothing had happened that we didn't run. Running feeds that we crawled, that we eased ourselves backward inch by inch, moving slow, breathing steady, refusing panic. The ground tugged, tested, let go. It took hours to reach firm earth. When we did, we lay there shaking, staring back at the place where men had been eaten. No marks, no disturbance. Just open land that we waited until nightfall before moving again. None of us spoke. At dawn we found Rourke's hat. It rested on the surface of the prairie like a tongue pressing against teeth. The screaming man's knife lay nearby. Both were clean. Years passed that I never crossed that land again. But sometimes I dream of it. In my dreams, the prairie breathes, slow, patient, waiting. And when fear touches the ground, Even just a little, it opens its mouth. Pine Ridge was the kind of town that looked tired even at noon. Dust lay thick in the street, buildings leaned like old men, and the air felt used up. People walked slow there, not from age, but from habit, like hurrying might wake something better left alone. The first thing you noticed was the sheriff. Sheriff Haskins sat on the porch of the jailhouse day and night. Same chair, same posture, same hat brim casting his eyes in shadow. Folks said he never slept. I laughed when I first heard it. Everyone sleeps. I stopped laughing after my second night in Pine Ridge. I arrived at dusk, passing through on a cattle deal that fell apart before supper. The barkeep told me rooms were cheap if I didn't mind the quiet. I asked him what he meant. He glanced toward the jailhouse window and said nothing. That night, I sat by the saloon window and watched the street. Haskins didn't move. Midnight came. 1 o'clock past 2. The lantern beside him burned steady. He didn't shift, didn't scratch, didn't breathe in any way I could see. I stepped outside to test it. Evening, Sheriff, I called. His head turned slow. His eyes were open, wet, reflecting lantern light like an animal's. Evening, he said. His voice was polite, tired, but not human tired. How long you been sitting there? I asked. He smiled just a little. Since the lawn needed mending, he said. I went back inside with my skin crawling. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt watched. At dawn, Haskins was still there, same position, same hat. I asked the barkeep about him. The barkeep's hands shook, pouring coffee. Haskins died, he whispered. Gunfight. Long time back. I laughed again. He didn't. They buried him, the barkeep said. He stood up after. I asked why no one left town. The barkeep looked at me like I'd asked why fire burned. Road don't let you, he said. I tried at noon. Bright sun. Clear skied. I rode straight out of town. 10 minutes later, I passed the same broken fence post. I turned around. Rode harder. Saw the same cottonwood again. The road curved gently and delivered me back into Pine Ridge like it was proud of itself. Haskins watched me arrive. He nodded. Told you, he said. I asked him what this place was. He stood for the first time I'd seen. His joints moved stiff like rusted hinges. He stepped close. I smelled old paper and dry blood. Law, he said. That's all. At night, the scraping started. Soft, circular, like fingernails dragged along with IT came from beyond the edge of town. Haskins rested his hand near his gun. Not tonight, he murmured. I asked what he meant. He looked past me, toward the darkness. Town stays, he said. World stays out. The scraping stopped. The next day, I saw the cemetery. Every grave faced outward, like they were watching the road. Names repeated, same families, same dates. Decades apart, I found Haskins' grave. It was empty. That night, someone knocked on my door. I heard my father's voice. He'd been dead 20 years. Son, he said, let me in. I froze. The voice came again. Gentle, familiar. I looked through the window, and one stood there. But frost traced handprints on the glass. Haskins fired once from the porch. The sound split the night. The knocking stopped. He didn't look at me. Don't answer, he said. They lie. On the third night, the thing tried harder. IT screamed. IT begged. It promised. Shapes moved beyond the lantern light. Tall, bent, too many joints. The town trembled. Buildings creaked like ribs under pressure. Haskins stood tall, gun drawn, badge dark with old stains. His eyes burned. Law says you stay, he shouted. The ground shook. The shapes retreated. Silence fell. I realized then the truth. Pine Ridge wasn't a prison. IT was a cork. Whatever lived beyond that boundary wanted in. Haskins wasn't keeping us inside. He was keeping out. Dawn. I asked him how long he'd been doing this. He stared at the horizon. Long as I have to, he said. Long as someone remembers what happens if I don't. I asked what happened to him. He touched his chest. Died wrong, he said. Didn't finish. I asked if I could help. He looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time, he looked tired. You can stay, he said. Or you can forget. I rode out at sunrise. The road let me go. Behind me, Pine Ridge faded like a bad memory. Years later, I passed near that country. Sometimes I don't stop. But late at night, when the wind scrapes just right, I hear a gunshot in the distance. And I know the sheriff is still awake. And the world is still held back. He rode in on a gray morning when the clouds hung low enough to feel like they were listening. The coyote followed his horse like a dog that knew its place. He trotted close, head low, yellow eyes never blinking, never leaving him. That alone was enough to make the men along the fence stop talking. Coyotes don't follow men unless they're starving, sick, or answering to something worse. The man tipped his hat and smiled like he'd practiced it in a mirror that didn't reflect right. That he said his name was Mercer. He said he could keep predators off a herd better than any rifle. I talked to him, he said, voice calm, almost kind. The ranch boss laughed because laughter comes easier than admitting fear. Calves have been disappearing for weeks, dragged off clean with no tracks worth reading. The boss hired Mercer before sundown. That first night, the coyotes didn't howl. They gathered instead. They sat just beyond the firelight in a loose half circle, silent and watching. Mercer sat apart from the men, knees drawn up, murmuring into the dark like he was praying backward. Every so often a coyote would answer, soft and respectful, like a student repeating a lesson. The men joked about it in low voices, but nobody laughed too loud. The next morning, not a single calf was missing. The night after that was quiet too. Too quiet, no insects and no owls called. Even the wind seemed careful. Men started sleeping easier, which is how trouble likes it. Then the faces started. The ranch hand swore he saw Mercer cross the yard wearing the boss's face, same beard, same scar near the jaw. But the smile was wrong, stretched thin like it was painted on wet skin. Another man claimed Mercer spoke to him in his dead brother's voice. He said the voice knew things only his brother would know. He said it asked him to come walk the pasture and talk like they used to. The man didn't go, that he drank instead until his hands shook. That I laughed with the others because laughing keeps fear from sitting too close. Then Mercer spoke to me that he stood at the edge of the firelight where shadows break a man into pieces. You miss her, he said softly. I felt my chest tighten before I understood why. My mother, I said without thinking. She'd been dead 7 years. Mercer nodded. Then he spoke at her voice. That IT wasn't an imitation. IT was exact. Same rhythm. Same catch when she said my name. Come on, honey, he said gently. Walk with me. My legs started moving before my mind caught up. Then I saw his hands. They were almost hands. The fingers bent wrong, joints too long, nails dark and cracked like hooves, pretending that I looked up at his face. For a moment it slid. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough to see the skin wasn't sitting right, like it was borrowed. I stepped back and reached for my gun. Mercer smiled wider. Don't be rude, he said, still in my mother's voice. That's when the ranch boss came out of the house with a shotgun. He shouted Mercer's name. Mercer turned and wore the boss's face. The boss froze. Seeing yourself looking back at you does something bad to a man. The coyotes stood up together, and no sound. Just movement that a wall of fur and eyes beyond the firelight. The boss fired. The blast hit Mercer square in the chest. Mercer fell. The coyotes did not run. They watched we approach slow, guns raised, breath held. Mercer twitched. Then his body started to change. Skin loosened like wet clothes. The boss's face slid off in strips, revealing gray mottled fur underneath. The jaw stretched. Teeth lengthened. The eyes stayed human too long. They blinked, confused, angry, afraid. The thing on the ground tried to speak. Only a wet yelp came out. .1 ranch hand vomited. Another crossed himself. The boss whispered, burn it. We piled brush and lit it. As flames climbed, the coyotes began to whine. Not like animals, like mourners. When the fire died, nothing recognizable was left. The coyotes were gone. We thought it was over. We were wrong. The next night, someone knocked on my door. I heard my mother's voice again. She sounded tired. She sounded cold. She said she was lost. I didn't open the door. The knocking continued, slow, patient. When I looked through the window, no one stood there, but the dust on the porch showed bare footprints, too long, too narrow. They pointed inward. Other men heard voices too, that a wife, that a son, that a dead friend. Each voice knew exactly what to say. .1 man followed it. We found his boots by the fence in the morning, still warm. The coyotes returned after that. They didn't circle the herd. They circled the house. Mercer appeared again 3 nights later, or something wearing him did. He stood at the edge of the lantern light, clapping slowly. You did good, he said in the boss's voice. You learned. We fired until the guns clicked empty. The thing didn't bleed, IT laughed. The laugh came out wrong, layered, like too many throats sharing one sound. IT stepped backward into the dark. The coyotes followed. The next morning, the boss was gone in blood and tracks, just his hat on the porch, and his voice calling softly from the pasture. We left the ranch that day. Every man did. Some things aren't meant to be kept. Years later, I still hear it sometimes, that my mother's voice, calling from just beyond the light. And every time the coyotes go quiet, we took shelter at the Dalton place because the sky looked wrong, low and greenish, like a bruise that wanted to spread. You could smell hail before it came, sharp as snapped glass. The wind had a mean edge too, cutting through coats like it knew where warmth lived. Old Mrs. Dalton had been dead 2 winters by then, but the house still stood, leaning into the weather like it remembered being lived in. Windows dark, porch sagging, the kind of place that feels full even when it's empty. Out back was the well, stone ring, moss in the cracks, and a rope so stiff it looked like it had forgotten how to bend. The bucket hung on a nail by the post, wood swollen and split. My partner Harmon wouldn't go near it. When I stepped toward it, he caught my sleeve. "Don't," he said. I looked at him. Harmon wasn't a jumpy man. He'd faced down stampedes and men with knives. But his eyes were too wide now, whites showing like a spooked horse. "What's wrong with the well?" I asked. Harmon swallowed. "That well talks." I huffed a laugh, because you laugh at the thing you don't want to consider. "Wells don't talk." Harmon spat into the dirt. "This one does. Calls you by name. And if it calls you..." He paused, like the rest of the thought had teeth. "You don't answer." The storm hit before we could argue it out. Hail rattled the roof like thrown gravel. Thunder rolled so close it made the boards tremble. We stayed inside, ate cold beans by lantern light, and listened to the wind worry the house. After sundown, the air changed. Not colder, closer, like the space between us and the dark got smaller. Like something outside had leaned its face toward the window to listen. The hail stopped. The wind eased. The quiet afterward felt wrong, heavy like damp wool. Then I heard it, soft, from outside, a voice that sounded like my mother's, though she'd been buried in Kansas for 10 years. "Eli." It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It slid into me easy, slipping right into the place behind my ribs where old memories live. I stood up without meaning to. My chair scraped. Harmon's hand clamped my arm. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't you answer that." The voice came again, from the direction of the well. "Eli." I stared at the door. My throat tightened. My mother used to say my name like that when she wanted me to come in from playing too far from the house. When she wanted me safe. "That ain't her," Harmon said, reading my face. "That ain't nobody you want." I should have listened. But grief is a hook, and that voice said it deep. I moved toward the door. Harmon followed, cussing under his breath like profanity could keep a man anchored. Outside, the yard shone wet under a thin moon. The air smelled like fresh earth and broken leaves. Everything was too clear, too sharp. The well sat black and still. "Eli," the voice whispered again, and it came from the well mouth like someone speaking up from a cellar. I approached slow. Each step felt like stepping into a story someone else had already finished. Harmon stayed behind me. "Eli," he hissed. I sweared. "Who's there?" I called, trying to make my voice steady. The well answered by saying my name again, the way you'd say it if you were luring a child toward candy. I leaned over the stone ring. Darkness. No water glimmer. No drip. Just depth, the kind that makes your stomach think about falling. From far below came a soft sigh, and then the voice changed. It became Harmon's mother's voice, thin, tired, pleading. Harmon made a strangled noise behind me. "No," he said. No. He backed up, boots slipping in mud. The well kept whispering, patient as hunger. Harmon turned like he wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't listen. His face was gray. Sweat shone on his upper lip. "How does it know?" he whispered. I didn't answer because I didn't know, and some questions make the dark smile. The rope on the well shifted. There was no wind, no hand on it, yet it slid over the stone lip with a dry rasp, inching toward Harmon like a snake making up its mind. Harmon froze. "Eli," he whispered. "Help me." I grabbed the rope and yanked it back hard. It didn't feel like rope. It felt like pulling on something living, like a tendon. It resisted, then gave suddenly, snapping my hands forward. The skin on my palms burned like I'd grabbed a hot skillet. The bucket came flying up from the well mouth with a clatter. It wasn't empty. It was full of water, so black it reflected no moon. And floating in it, face up like it was resting, was a hat. Harmon's hat. Harmon was still standing behind me. I could hear him breathing. But when I turned, his hand was on his head, patting like a man searching for a thought. "My hat," he whispered. The well whispered again, soft as a lullaby. "Come closer." Harmon took one step. I lunged and wrapped my arms around his waist. He fought me like he was drowning in air, twisting and clawing, desperate to get to the well. His strength didn't feel like his. It felt borrowed. "Stop," I snarled in his ear. "Harmon, stop." He sobbed, one sharp, childlike sound, and the well answered with his name, gentler now. "Harmon." His body went slack for one breath. Then the rope slid again and brushed my wrist. It felt like a finger. My stomach dropped. I jerked back, pulling Harmon with me, and we both hit the mud hard. The bucket wobbled and spilled a little of that black water onto the ground. Where it touched, the grass darkened and died in a clean circle, like it had been burned. Harmon lay there shaking, eyes fixed on the well. It said my name in her voice, he whispered, like she was right there. "Don't listen," I said, though I was listening too, because the well had my mother's voice and it knew exactly how to use it. Silence fell. The well didn't whisper. Not for a long minute. Not for two. Then, warm as breath right beside my ear, came a voice so close I felt it on my skin. "Now you." I flinched so hard my neck cracked. Harmon grabbed my shirt. "Don't," he pleaded. "Eli, don't." I stared at the well mouth. The blackness seemed deeper than before, as if the well had grown while we weren't looking. My mother's voice drifted up, soft and loving. "Eli, honey." My legs wanted to move. My heart wanted to believe. I clenched my jaw until my teeth hurt and forced my eyes away. I looked at the horizon instead, at the line where night met the world. "We're leaving," I said. Harmon nodded fast, like a man accepting a lifeline. We saddled in silence, hands shaking. The horses were nervous, stamping and snorting. One refused to face the well, neck arched, eyes rolling. As we rode out, the well whispered one last time, quiet, amused. "Eli." I didn't answer, but the name followed us like a burr in a sock, catching on every quiet moment. Harmon died 2 nights later in the next town. No wound, no fever. Just stopped, like his breath had been called back and he'd finally surrendered it. They buried him on a hill. And for weeks after, every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, soft as a secret from deep underground. "Eli,